Carlos Santana is the kind of legend that is built, not born.
His guitar has brought solace and healing to countless lives for many years. Its melodies and rhythms go deep into the soul.
But when the artist in charge of the music requires personal rehabilitation, what then?
Santana, at 77 years old, has revealed a truth that many of us may have sensed in his music but never completely grasped, allowing us to peel back the layers of his life. This is more than simply a chapter in Santana's life that he has just spoken up about.
You can't get to the heart of a sound without it.
In this unsung biography of Carlos Santana, we will hear a lament in every chord, a revelation in every riff, and a window into the soul of a genuine legend in every syllable. Myths have this amazing quality about them.
We await their every action, word,
and note because of the air of mystery and allure they exude.
Among those legendary figures is Carlos Santana.
His guitar has been a guiding light for decades, creating a symphony of rock, blues, and Latin rhythms that sounds almost holy.
Carlos Santana was born on July 20, 1947, in the little sun-drenched village of Autlando, Navarro, Mexico.
Music permeated every aspect of daily life, which was otherwise modest.
As a talented mariachi violinist, Jose Santana's passion for the music seemed to radiate from him.
For Jose, it was more than simply a job, it was his entire existence. It was only natural for him to want his children to carry on his legacy. Carlos received a violin when he was 5 years old. He honed his skills under his father's guidance, but despite his admiration for his father's musical ability, he never really felt connected to the violin. Even if it was more of a job than a means of expression, life has a strange way of leading you to your fate.
When Carlos was 8 years old, he found the guitar, and his life took a dramatic turn. Carlos didn't only grow up in a musical household. It engrossed him.
He soaked up the mariachi rhythms and melodies and traditional Mexican music for hours on end.
Simultaneously, he became acquainted with American blues and rock musicians like B.B. King over the radio.
Three men, Little Richard, T-Bone Walker, and King. His distinctive sound, a fusion of cultural influences, was born out of these competing approaches.
However, the outland lifestyle was anything but glamorous. Wealth was a major issue for his family.
They were frugal people. They, too, had to work hard to make ends meet, as did many other families during that time. Unfortunately, his dad was too busy playing at various events to keep up with his son's guitar training.
An American man soon became Santana's friend and into their lives.
The man ingratiated himself into their life, portraying himself as a trustworthy figure, and seemed kind and sympathetic. The young Carlos was emotionally devastated, humiliated, and puzzled by the cumulative effects of the assault.
Grasping the dynamics at play here is critical.
The abuser took advantage of Carlos's sympathy and the naivete he had as a child.
This man manipulated Carlos into opening up to him by acting like a buddy and protector.
Under the pretense of providing assistance or direction, the man would frequently lead him into dangerous circumstances where the abuse could take place. Carlos felt imprisoned during the grooming process because he had no idea what was going on or how to get out of it. It had a terrible effect on my emotions. Carrying a secret he couldn't reveal made him feel alone and burdened. Because of this, I felt terrible about myself for a long time. The wounds were more than just painful. Feelings of worthlessness and distrust, brought on by the abuse, distorted his view of relationships and the security they offered. The Santana family underwent a transformative relocation to Tijuana in the late 1950s. Upon learning about this occurrence, they eventually settled in San Francisco in the early 1960s.
They endured the same hardships as many other immigrant families.
But the primary one was providing for basic living expenses. Carlos took on a number of low-paying jobs to help support his family because he was eager to contribute and find his niche. Working as a dishwasher at a diner was his first job. He scrubbed dishes and silverware by day after day over a hot sink. It was definitely not a glamorous job. The hours were long, the pay was low, and there was often a cacophony of dishes clattering and voices shouting instructions. However, Carlos addressed it with a calm resolve. Working there wasn't simply a means to an end, it was an opportunity to make a difference while he pursued his passion for music.
However, he had other jobs besides dishwashing.
He had worked as a street musician in Tijuana before relocating to San Francisco, where he would play guitar in parks, clubs, and bars for tips on weekends and evenings. He wasn't merely honing his skills, he was fighting for his life. He conveyed intense feelings through his performances. fusing his love of the blues and rock with his native Mexican music. Jam sessions in San Francisco's emerging music scene were frequent destinations for him in the nights following his dishwashing duties. The city was teeming with counterculture spirit and experimental music in the 1960s. Santana would bring his guitar to local events, where he would play for free for hours on end in the hopes of becoming famous. His unexpected employment history includes a stint as a janitor at Mission High School, where he had previously studied. Cleaning the same classrooms where he had sat as a kid was a humbling experience. Nevertheless, Carlos remained unfazed by the situation's comedy. On the contrary, he saw the labor as an integral part of his path forward. After forming the Santana Blues Band, he played his first professional engagement. The Fillmore West was famous for presenting new, experimental musicians in San Francisco, which was a center for cultural and musical experimentation at the time. As they began performing in local watering holes, the Santana Blues Band became known for their innovative blend of Latin rhythms, rock, and blues. Word got around about the band because of Carlos's passionate and soulful guitar playing. They were unconcerned about the fact that they often made only tips. All that mattered was that they were creating music. The seminal moment occurred in 1966 at the world-renowned Fillmore West. Bill Graham, the illustrious concert promoter who would have a significant impact on Santana's career, was responsible for launching the careers of innumerable performers at this iconic theater. When Graham saw the Santana Blues Band play, he immediately recognized their exceptional skill. He sent an invitation for them to perform at the Fillmore, a venue that served as a springboard for numerous iconic acts of that time. When Santana's band played there for the first time in 1966, they left a lasting impression. What made their music so special was the way it fused Latin rhythms with blues and rock in a way that no one had ever heard before. The fascinating guitar solos played by Carlos were brimming with passion and intensity. The renowned concert promoter who was instrumental in Santana's rise to fame. When Graham saw the Santana Blues Band play, he immediately recognized their exceptional skill. He sent an invitation for them to perform at the Fillmore, a venue that served as a springboard for numerous iconic acts of that time. However, 1969 at Woodstock was the turning point. The invitation to play at the now iconic event came to Carlos's band when he was barely 22 years old. This gig was intriguing because, as a result of a last-minute lineup change, they were forced onto the stage before Carlos felt prepared, even though they weren't scheduled to play that early in the set. It was weird because he hadn't even had time to recover from his hallucinogenic trip, which he later acknowledged. That being said, the moment he plucked the first chord, the audience was captivated. One of the highlights of the festival was undoubtedly their soul sacrifice performance. It seemed as though Carlos's whole existence had culminated in one instant, the raw emotion, the strong fire. The mayhem that went down behind the scenes at Woodstock only added to the spectacle of the show. After the fact, Carlos admitted that the weird and difficult experience had been heightened by the psychedelics he had taken prior to performing. Still, he managed to put on a show that would forever mark him in rock lore, regardless of the odds. The career of Santana took off after Woodstock. In 1969, Santana and his band were able to contract with Columbia Records with the substantial assistance of their manager and ardent backer, Bill Graham. In the same year, Santana became overnight sensations because to their thrilling performance of Soul Sacrifice at Woodstock. The band's contagious enthusiasm and Carlos's scorching guitar abilities were on full display for the enormous crowd at the performance that would be immortalized in the Woodstock video. Not long after that, in 1969, they released their self-titled first album Santana, which featured the popular song Evil Ways. The album cemented Santana's position in the music industry with its blend of rock, Latin percussion, and blues. It reached number 4 on the Billboard 200 chart and stayed there for nearly 2 years. Abraxas 1970, Santana's second album, catapulted the band to even greater fame. Some of the most famous songs on album were Black Magic Woman, Carlos's Latin-infused rendition of a Fleetwood Mac song, and Hoy Como Va, a reworking of a classic by Tito Puente. After selling millions of copies, Santana became a household name thanks to Abraxas, which hit number 1 on the Billboard charts. Hits like Everybody's Everything and No One to Depend On continued on Santana's 1971 third album, Santana the 3. Around this time, guitarist Neil Schon joined the group, giving the sound a new dimension with his twin guitar dynamic. Carlos, when Santana's star began to rise, started to look into spirituality and find ways to incorporate it into his music. Caravanserai 1972, a radical change from the group's previous sound, made this point clear. The album's experimental arrangements and meditative themes gave it a jazz fusion sound. Although it failed to achieve the same level of economic success as Carlos' earlier albums, it was highly praised by critics and showcased his boldness in taking risks.
A distinct scenario unfolded in Santana's personal life while his fame skyrocketed.
We like to think of Carlos Santana and other figures like him as untouchable, living legends who make it look easy. But the reality is that everyone, no matter how talented, has to overcome obstacles that might hurt badly. One of those struggles for Carlos was his addiction. During that time, drugs were intrinsic to the music industry and could be found anywhere. The attraction wasn't about blending in or seeking euphoria for Carlos, it was about figuring out how to deal. Substance abuse, he subsequently said, was a means for him to alleviate tension and feelings of loneliness and to block out the mental chatter that accompanied intense emotional distress. The occasional indulgence quickly became a dependency. Carlos became caught up in a terrible cycle when drugs became his crutch.
In search of solace, only to discover more disarray.
Aside from physically harming Carlos, his addiction also impacted his relationships and musical career.
For Carlos, what was the turning point?
The epiphany wasn't a singular event but rather the culmination of several decisions and insights. His spirituality was crucial in his road to recovery. Deborah was there for Carlos as he became profoundly involved with Sri Chinmoy, an Indian guru, in the early 1970s. The fact that Deborah was born into a musical family, her father was the famous blues musician Saunders King, probably facilitated an immediate bond between the two. Marriage took place in 1973, beginning a union that would endure for over 30 years. As Carlos' star began to rise, Deborah became a constant and encouraging presence in his life.
Angelica, Stella, and Salvador were their 3 children.
Carlos's personal and professional life were both expertly managed by Deborah and others. At a time when Carlos was searching for deeper purpose in life, the teachings of Chinmoy, which stressed meditation, self-discipline, and devotion to the divine, resonated profoundly with him. As he devoted himself to the spiritual disciplines taught by the guru, becoming a vegetarian, meditating every day, and even choosing the name Devadip, Deborah stood by him. While at it, Carlos worked with jazz greats like Miles Davis and John McLaughlin, delving even farther into the intersection of spirituality and jazz. Their shared interest in fusing music with spiritual practices was displayed on the 1973 album Love, Devotion, Surrender, which was a collaboration with McLaughlin and was motivated by their mutual devotion to Sri Chinmoy, an Indian spiritual guru. Carlos sought to craft his own path after his separation from Sri Chinmoy in the 1980s, but the spiritual groundwork he received there enabled him to confront his addiction directly. He realized that drugs were actually getting in the way of the clarity and connection he was seeking, rather than providing an escape. His health, relationships, and music were his new priorities as he gradually attempted to regain control of his life.
How does the music we adore reflect the hardships we face in life? For Santana, the chaotic mid to late 1970s were a moment like no other.
Many founding members left the band due to internal strife and creative differences, which resulted in a drastically changed lineup. Carlos kept putting out albums like Borbolita in 1974 and Welcome 1973, but they weren't as commercially successful as his earlier ones. Maintaining a healthy equilibrium between his musical career and his spiritual life was another obstacle Carlos had to overcome. But he never wavered in his commitment to his art, trying new things and working with other artists to maintain a unique sound. Although Santana's popularity had leveled off by the 1990s, Carlos still had enough of music in him. A joint album titled Supernatural, which was issued by him in 1999, brought him back to the attention of listeners of a younger generation. Smooth, with Rob Thomas and Maria, featuring the product GNB, were among the album's hit singles. Among its 9 Grammy wins, including Album of the Year, Supernatural became an international phenomenon, selling more than 30 million copies. Incredible as it was, Santana's return proved that his music was timeless.
Carlos Santana had a hard time integrating his identity with the trauma he had experienced as a child.
The emotional scars he bore as a result of his formative years were more than skin deep, they were an integral aspect of who he was. His attitude and music were both influenced by these conflicts, which made his songs more meaningful and impactful to a wide audience.
How, however, can one transform anguish into beauty? Carlos started to talk about his history when he was considerably older.
Carlos has revealed snippets of the depression he suffered in interviews given throughout the years.
Trauma of that nature doesn't go away on its own.
Attempting to shield himself from the world while also longing for connection, Carlos spent a significant portion of his childhood in what he describes as a fog. After keeping silent for decades, he courageously spoke up about the abuse in an interview in the year 2000. Although it was difficult, he came to the realization that suppressing it was actually making it stronger. His solace came from music. When he was at a loss for words, he let his guitar do the talking. Those unpolished, hurtful tones in his solos? Those are the cries of his spirit, not mere noise. His songs resonated with listeners on a profound, even mystical level because of the honesty he brought to them through his suffering. It appears that Carlos had other methods of handling his emotions as well. Carlos had been unfaithful to Kings, his wife, all this time. During their marriage, he admitted in interviews that he had messed up. He acknowledged the pain his actions caused Deborah and apologized profusely, calling them selfish. Deborah openly recounted her experiences in her 2005 memoir, Space Between the Stars, shedding light on the emotional challenges she faced while being Carlos' wife. As a mother, partner, and supporter of his job, she felt neglected and underappreciated at times, she said. It became more apparent as time went on that Carlos and Deborah were developing independently. Even while Deborah did her best to guide Carlos on his spiritual path, their views on life and its meaning did not always coincide. They made an effort to make it work, but they were just too emotionally distant.
Their split was finalized in 2007.
Both parties were respectful and appreciative of the years they had spent together, so the divorce went smoothly. After the fact, Carlos said that losing Deborah was the worst thing that had ever happened to him, and that it had made him reassess his life's values. Deborah persisted in her roles as writer and benefactor, and Carlos gave his whole attention to his music, his faith, and his own development. Cindy Blackman, a drummer who had previously worked with Lenny Kravitz, marries Carlos in 2010. Carlos has always emphasized the significance of love, forgiveness, and learning from one's mistakes. His connection with her has brought him renewed happiness. It appears as though that the cosmos took his warnings far too literally.
Carlos Santana had heart surgery in the year 2021.
A health problem he was having forced him to miss multiple tour dates in December of that year. It came to light thereafter that he had cardiac surgery to fix a problem.
Those particulars regarding the operation were kept under wraps.
He gave his fans the rundown, thanked them for their support, and let them know he was taking it easy to get well. After taking a few months off to recharge, he was back on stage with renewed vigor and concentration. This event made him realize how important it was to pay attention to his health and his life in general.
Several months down the road, in July 2022, concertgoers in Michigan experienced a genuine fright. Unexpectedly fell to the stage. What caused it? Heat stroke and loss of fluids can occur. There was a moment of realism.
Even though his body was begging for a break, 75-year-old Santana was still giving it his all for his followers. Fortunately, he got well and comforted everyone by stating, "Just taking it easy," which is his trademark gracefulness.
Soon, I will return. After that, Santana faced new challenges in 2023.
He caused controversy with remarks he made during a performance concerning gender identity. Those were the kinds of occasions when seemingly random words, maybe uttered in a mental stream, seemed to take on meaning all their own.
Many people thought the comments were disrespectful, therefore they received a lot of backlash. It didn't take long for Santana to get into trouble after the social media went boom.
On the other hand, Carlos Santana
He has always taken responsibility for his actions.
He apologized to the public and made it clear that he never meant to cause harm or division.
"I want to honor and respect all people's ideals and beliefs," he remarked, using his own words. Was that all?
Yes, for some. It was too late for some. His readiness to admit his humanity, though, is what really strikes out. Everyone has made a mistake they later came to regret. It is simple for fans to hold Carlos Santana in high esteem. But these kinds of things show us that he's more than just an icon, he's a real guy.
His narrative is extremely sympathetic because of his shortcomings, isn't it? Life is a voyage, after all.
Even when we fall, there is always a way to get back on track. Stories like Santana's show us that.
Maybe that's what makes Carlos Santana so special.
Whatever is going on, whether it's on stage or off, he always manages to make music out of it.
Where do you stand?